Alright, so I played a game a while ago called Deep Sky Derelicts. I recommend it, but I feel like the second part was basically irrelevant. The story is obvious, you find what you seek. So finishing it wouldn't show you anything new. I play it until it gets boring because it kind of does. But until then it is pretty good. Solid turn-based combat with minor exploration and role-playing. What is it about? In the deep dark future, there are only derelicts. At least for your average run-of-the-mill guy. These horrible abandoned space stations are crawling with monsters never seen before. And now, a scavenger is tasked with finding a mysterious mothership. Will he succeed? Will he fail? It is all up to you and how well you can manage your crew free in a riveting, turn-based combat. Okay, so what did I like? I like the turn-based combat, in cards, and a bunch of different gear, so this was a match made in heaven. It is very similar to Disciples or Sony or Final Fantasy of all things, only you get to use cards to build up a deck for each character. It is done through equipment instead of a more traditional deck builder, so you can choose to equip a worse item stat-wise, but with better abilities. It's a balancing act, and sometimes you don't want any equipment in some slots at all, just because it offers such bad cards. Art style is also reminiscent of Darkest Dungeon. Maybe not up to par, but it is still very much a welcome sight. Dark, grimy, and depressing. I enjoy this kind of thing. Misery seeks company and all that. Still, I don't think it is really as good as some of the memorable titles, like Darkest Dungeon, or Disciples actually. I remember totally loving the unit portraits in the second Disciples. It was so damn good. Here it's a more toned down, pixelated version of Dead Space. I mean, it's still not awful, but not amazing either. I like the setting too, a grimy dark world filled with all sorts of nasties and people just trying to survive. Like Shadowrun in space, only with much less neon. It is pretty simple, but I can see this kind of story branching into a whole series of games or media. It just writes itself. You get to explore space, fight, parley with aliens and rogue servitors, find treasure, escape traps, and at the end of the day just barely scrape by after all that back-breaking adventure. What are the negatives? The combat, while is a strong point, is also its downfall. In my opinion, the game wasn't well balanced at all. Currently I only got one full playthrough, but it seems like if I were to try another with all different classes, the game would be a lot harder. I accidentally got an absolutely broken combo, but without it seems like the game might be a bit too hard. I just make it so instead of playing one card a turn, it's 2, 3, sometimes I went up to 7. It gets really stupid. Can borderline go through the entire deck in a single turn. And then Scavenger draws a ton of cards and uses an ability which discards all cards and deals damage depending on the amount discarded. That's absolutely broken. In addition, past a certain point, fights just become a nuisance. All the derelicts become the same, all the enemies are repetitive, and there isn't really any reason to care. In Darkest Dungeon, it felt like the guys were your guys. You hired them, you leveled them, they were your team. They had personality. Here it's faceless goons who are just easily replaced. They don't really have personality, and losing one doesn't matter that much. There's no panicking or barks when an epic crit occurs. No badass narrator. Also, getting a good drop is extremely rare, and more often than not, even if rare does drop, it won't be the kind you'd want. Because the stats might be good, but the cards are not. This becomes especially obvious later on in the game, where instead of getting a bonus turn, you get an item with like 20% better stats. But a card which is absolutely worthless, like damage your shield and restore someone else's. I already have a medic, this is completely pointless. There's a ton of gear, but a lot of it is just like that. A newbie trap giving people choices, but in reality just offering the exact same thing with good things hidden and not obvious. Hint, bonus turns are good. After a certain point, around 60 or 70% through the game, the story takes a bit of a nosedive. There's a ton of writing for the sake of saying more words and not really any incentive to read it. I dislike when games or stories of any sort do that. Feels like text-based games with some inexperienced authors who suffer a lot from this kind of approach. Also, the levels get bigger and more annoying to navigate, full of enemies who no longer give any experience and just stalk the player with no way to avoid them aside from fighting. It's like random encounters in Final Fantasy. Okay, let me just explore this cave and okay, another fight. Right, it's over. Let's keep going. Okay, another fight, okay. Alright, another step toward the cave. Oh, come on! Leave me the hell alone already! I just want to explore this stupid cave! That's what it gets. That's how it gets. Also, I hate Final Fantasy games for this exact reason. I despise those random encounters so damn much. The music gets old too. It isn't bad, but there is very little variety. Felt like a total of 3 tracks. And those could be the best ever, but even that will get old in a game longer than a few hours. All in all, I'd say for $1 I got it for, thanks Humble Bundle. It is one of the best purchases I've ever made, but at full price the game is too flawed. Feels like at one point the devs were told to stretch instead of making the experience shorter, but a lot more memorable. And it definitely shows. Strong start, okay middle, bad late game.